The first scream never made it into the police report. By the time anyone admitted they had heard it, the sound had already been rewritten as wind. Wind cutting between half-finished concrete towers, wind slipping through broken window frames, wind humming through an abandoned construction site that had been stalled for nearly 2 years. But wind does not beg. If you want the full reconstruction of what happened inside Tower 3 that night, the lies, the silence, and the one mistake the killer did not know he made, stay with this case from beginning to end. At 6 minutes past 11 on a Saturday night, a security contractor named Ramesh Iyer unlocked the temporary gate to the Crescent Heights residential project on the eastern edge of the city. The development had been paused due to financial disputes. Only skeletal structures stood against the skyline, 3 unfinished towers, exposed rebar, and plastic tarps flapping like torn flags in the dark. Ramesh had been hired after repeated complaints of trespassers using the empty towers for drinking and vandalism. His instructions were simple: walk the perimeter, check the generator room, sign the logbook, and leave before midnight. He never signed out. At 7 minutes past midnight, a passing taxi driver noticed the main gate partially open and headlights still glowing inside the compound. He assumed someone had forgotten to shut them off. At 22 minutes past midnight, he drove past again. The headlights were still on. At 30 minutes past midnight, he called the police. When officers arrived, they found Ramesh's vehicle idling near Tower 3. The driver's side door was open. The keys were still in the ignition. There were no signs of forced entry at the gate. There were no immediate signs of struggle in the parking area. There was, however, a single smear of blood along the unfinished concrete column just inside the tower entrance. It was thin, dragged, and partially diluted, as if someone had tried to wipe it with water. The body was discovered on the 12th floor. Detective Rachel Munro arrived at the scene at 1 hour and 9 minutes past midnight. She stepped out of the unmarked vehicle without looking up at the tower. She had already seen too many buildings like this, structures that promised comfort and delivered silence. Roland would later describe her posture in his report as restrained but alert. Those who worked with knew that meant she had already sensed something was wrong beyond the obvious. The elevator shafts were not yet installed. Rachel climbed the concrete stairs, each step echoing in hollow repetition. There was no electricity inside the tower. Flashlights carved narrow tunnels through the dark. On the 12th floor landing, the smell reached them first. Metallic. Wet. The body lay 10 meters from the stairwell, positioned unnaturally straight on its back. Hands placed at the sides. Legs aligned. The face turned slightly to the left. A construction tarp had been spread beneath him. That detail mattered. Ramesh Iyer had been stabbed once. The wound was precise, just below the sternum, angled upward. The medical examiner would later confirm that the blade had entered between ribs, avoiding bone, piercing the heart directly. Death would have been rapid. There were no defensive wounds on his hands, no bruising on the forearms, no dirt under the fingernails. His flashlight lay beside him, unbroken. His security baton remained clipped to his belt. Rachel crouched near the body without touching it. She studied the tarp first, not the wound. Someone planned for cleanup, she said quietly. There were faint droplets leading toward the edge of the floor, where a temporary drainage pipe ran down the exterior of the building. Water stains suggested an attempt had been made to rinse the surface. But the killer had misjudged something. Concrete is porous. Blood sinks. Forensic teams would later confirm that although the visible stain had been diluted, the pattern beneath remained intact. What troubled Rachel more was the positioning. This was not rage. This was arrangement. The victim had been placed deliberately, hands aligned, spine straight, chin angled, as if staged. At 2 hours past midnight, officers began canvassing the surrounding streets. No witnesses reported seeing anyone enter or leave the compound between 10 in the evening and midnight. No vehicles were recorded exiting on nearby traffic cameras. The gate lock showed no damage, which meant one of 3 things. The killer had a key. The killer had been inside already, or Ramesh had opened the gate willingly. The second possibility unsettled Rachel most. By 3 in the morning, The victim's phone had been retrieved from his pocket. It showed no outgoing calls after 10 in the evening. One incoming call at 10:40, two had lasted 9 seconds. The number was unregistered. The tower itself had no surveillance installed yet. However, a neighboring commercial warehouse maintained a single external camera facing the street. Footage review began before sunrise. At 9:48 in the evening, Ramesh's vehicle entered the compound. At 10:11, a motorcycle passed slowly in front of the gate, but did not stop. At 10:37, a figure appeared briefly at the edge of the frame near the outer wall. The image quality was poor. The individual wore dark clothing and a helmet. The timestamp then jumped. For precisely 4 minutes, the footage glitched, static replacing video. When the feed resumed, the street was empty. The glitch was not random. A technical review would later confirm signal interference consistent with a portable jammer device operating within close proximity, which meant premeditation. This was not a spontaneous killing. Rachel requested a deeper background review on Ramesh Iyer. He was 36 years old, former military logistics officer, honorably discharged, recently divorced, no criminal record. Financial strain noted but not severe. There was no immediate motive. By mid-morning, word of the death had reached the site's primary investor consortium. They expressed concern over public perception. Before asking about investigative progress, Rachel ignored the tone. What caught her attention instead was a discrepancy in the site access registry. The logbook showed Ramesh had signed in at 10 in the evening. The previous entry, dated 3 days earlier, was signed by a subcontractor performing electrical inspections. The name on that line, Arvind Malhotra. Arvind Malhotra had died 6 months earlier in what had been ruled a construction accident at another project across the city. The signature in the logbook looked fresh. The ink had not faded. When Rachel held the page under light, she noticed pressure marks from the line beneath it. Someone had pressed hard. Too hard. As if unfamiliar with the handwriting they were trying to replicate. By early afternoon, fingerprint analysis on the logbook returned partials belonging to Ramesh and one unidentified set. That set did not match any registered employees associated with the Crescent Heights project. Rachel stood again at the base of Tower 3 before sunset. She looked upward this time. The tarp detail still unsettled her. Why bring a tarp unless you knew you would need it? Why choose the 12th floor? Why that location specifically? Construction plans showed that the 12th floor in Tower 3 was scheduled to house premium duplex apartments. High ceilings, large glass panels, open layouts, the kind of units investors marketed aggressively. Rachel requested access to archived blueprints from the planning phase. There, buried in early drafts, she found something unusual. Before financial disputes had halted construction, Tower 3's 12th floor had been redesigned twice. The first design included a concealed utility corridor running behind the main structural column near the stairwell. The second revision removed it. On the physical site, however, the corridor still existed. It had been sealed with temporary drywall. Someone familiar with the original layout would know it was there. At 6 in the evening, forensic teams located faint shoe impressions inside that concealed corridor. The tread pattern was distinctive, industrial, imported, uncommon in domestic retail. The size suggested an adult male. There were no matching prints leading back down the stairs, which meant the killer had likely used the external scaffolding. Rachel stepped toward the building's outer edge and looked down. The scaffolding remained partially assembled along the eastern face. It would allow someone physically capable to descend without using the stairwell. That explained the absence of exit footage. It did not explain the motive. The postmortem report arrived shortly after 8 in the evening. Time of death approximately 11:12. Toxicology negative. Single wound. Clean blade. Narrow width. Likely a specialized tool rather than a kitchen knife. Rachel reviewed photographs again. The angle of insertion suggested the killer had been standing close, within arm's length, possibly face to face. No signs of forced restraint, no blunt force trauma, which brought her back to the beginning. Ramesh had likely known his attacker, or at least not perceived immediate threat. There was one final detail in the medical examiner's notes that shifted the investigation. Under ultraviolet examination, faint particulate residue was detected on the victim's shirt collar. Cement dust, not from Tower 3. A different composition. Comparative analysis indicated it matched a supplier operating exclusively on high-end redevelopment projects in the Northern District. Rachel did not speak when she read that. She simply requested a list of all active construction sites using that specific material blend. There were 7. One of them belonged to a redevelopment firm partially owned by the same investment group funding Crescent Heights. Conflict between contractors had been rumored months earlier. Arvind Malhotra, the subcontractor whose name appeared in the logbook, had worked on both projects. He had filed a formal safety complaint 2 weeks before his death. The complaint had disappeared from official records. Rachel closed the file slowly. This case was no longer about a lone security guard walking an empty tower. It was about something that had been buried, and someone who believed it was. If you follow evidence over assumptions, subscribe now. And tell me in the comments, based on what you've heard so far, does the timeline feel intentional or accidental? The 12th floor was not chosen at random. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the tarp had removed, the body transferred, and the surface beneath marked with fluorescent indicators tracing diluted blood patterns invisible to the naked eye. Yet even stripped of its immediate violence, the space felt deliberate. Detective Rachel Munro returned before 8 in the morning with structural plans in hand. She walked directly to the column beside the stairwell, the one with the faint smear discovered the night before. In daylight, the wipe marks were clearer. Someone had poured water from a portable container and attempted to drag the diluted blood toward the unfinished drainage pipe. It was not panic. It was procedure. The forensic reconstruction team confirmed that the victim had not been killed at the exact spot where he was found. There were micro, spatter traces closer to the concealed utility corridor, traces missed in the initial sweep due to the tarp placement, which meant the tarp had been positioned after the attack, not before. The killer had moved the body. Carefully, Rachel requested a reenactment based on blood flow angles and gravity patterns. When the simulation concluded, the result was precise. The fatal strike occurred less than 2 meters from the sealed corridor entrance. Someone had lured Ramesh toward that specific structural point. Why? She turned her attention to the concealed corridor itself. The drywall seal was temporary, thin enough to cut quickly with a utility blade. Forensic techs had already removed a portion for entry. Inside, the space was narrow, dusty, unfinished, and recently disturbed. Boot impressions overlapped in the fine cement powder. One set confirmed as belonging to Ramesh from comparison with his issued footwear. The second set matched the industrial tread documented the night before. What changed in daylight was scale. The killer had spent time inside the corridor. There were scrape marks along the inner concrete wall consistent with something metallic being placed, adjusted, then removed. Rachel crouched and ran a gloved finger along the wall. A faint rectangular outline remained. Something had once been mounted there, but not during construction. Recently, she ordered luminol testing inside the corridor. The result altered the case trajectory. Under chemical illumination, faint streaks became visible, not blood, but residue patterns consistent with electrical wiring adhesive. There had been equipment inside that corridor. Temporary, portable, possibly surveillance or signal equipment. The 4-minute camera interference from the warehouse feed returned to her mind. Signal jammers require proximity. If the killer operated one from inside this concealed corridor, it would explain the clean blackout window, which meant the corridor was not simply a hiding space. It was an operational point. By mid-morning, Rachel requested telecom triangulation data for the surrounding cell towers between 10:30 and 11:30 the previous night. Preliminary analysis revealed something subtle. Most devices in the area registered brief signal loss during the 4-minute glitch window. But one device did not. One phone maintained steady signal strength throughout the interference period. That anomaly placed the device either shielded from the jammer or positioned directly beside it. The phone was registered under a corporate account belonging to Northern Axis Redevelopment Group. Northern Axis shared two investors with the Crescent Heights project, and Northern Axis had acquired the site where Arvind Malhotra died 6 months earlier. Rachel requested subscriber details. The device was assigned to a project coordinator named Kunal Deshpande, 32 years old, civil engineer, no criminal record, employed by Northern Axis for 4 years. Location ping placed his phone within a 200-meter radius of Crescent Heights at 10:58 in the evening. Kunal's registered home address was 12 kilometers away. There was no scheduled work at Crescent Heights that night. By early afternoon, officers visited Kunal's residence. He answered the door calmly. He stated he had been home the entire evening. When asked about his phone location data, he explained he had lent the device to a colleague temporarily due to a battery issue. The explanation was possible, but the colleague he named, Rohit Sethi, was currently traveling abroad. Travel records confirmed departure 2 days prior. Rachel did not accuse. She observed. Kunal's shoes, visible near the entrance, were athletic, smooth tread, not industrial. However, on a side rack near the balcony door sat a pair of heavy-duty imported work boots, industrial tread, uncommon brand, size matching the impressions from the corridor. When asked, Kunal stated they were leftovers from an earlier overseas project and had not been worn recently. Forensic officers requested the boots voluntarily. Kunal hesitated for 2 seconds before agreeing. That hesitation mattered. Back at the lab, comparison testing began. Preliminary overlay alignment between the corridor prints and the seized boots reached 86% match within the first hour. Not conclusive, but significant. Meanwhile, financial records revealed another thread. 3 months earlier, Ramesh Iyer had received an anonymous deposit equal to 3 months of his salary. The source was traced to a Shell account linked indirectly to a consulting firm contracted by Northern Axis. The transaction had no explanation. Rachel requested Ramesh's email records. Among routine correspondence, one draft message stood out. It had never been sent. Subject line, Original Plans Tower 3. The body of the draft referenced, Sealed access point still intact. And, they never removed it. There was no recipient listed. The timestamp was 2 weeks before his death. Rachel reopened the archived blueprints. The concealed corridor was not merely structural. In the earliest proposal documents, that corridor connected to a reinforced vault space intended for temporary secure storage of high-value imported fixtures prior to installation. When cost-cutting revisions occurred, the vault plan was officially scrapped, but on-site inspection now confirmed the physical space remained behind the corridor wall, a cavity large enough to conceal equipment. Or something else. By late afternoon, Rachel authorized controlled demolition of a section beyond the corridor. Behind the thin concrete partition they found it. A compact reinforced chamber, empty. Except for mounting brackets and residual packaging foam. Someone had stored something there recently. Something valuable enough to justify signal jamming and precise staging. What could that be? Northern Axis specialized in redevelopment and foreign investment properties, high-value imports, custom marble, European fixtures, but none of those required secrecy after delivery, unless documentation had been falsified. A deeper audit into supply invoices uncovered irregularities tied to Arvind Malhotra's final project before his death. He had filed that missing safety complaint regarding structural deviation from approved vault removal. In plain terms, the vault space was never decommissioned as required. It had been left intact intentionally. Rachel reconstructed the timeline. Arvind discovers unauthorized vault retention. Files complaint. Complaint disappears. Arvind dies in a supposed construction accident. 6 months later, Ramesh signs in at Crescent Heights and drafts an email referencing the sealed access point. 2 weeks after that draft, he is killed on the 12th floor near the same corridor. The pattern was no longer circumstantial. It was directional. Someone was protecting what that vault represented. By evening, forensic analysis on Kunal's boots reached 93% pattern alignment with the corridor impressions. Trace cement dust recovered from the boot soles matched the unique supplier blend identified on Ramesh's collar. Kunal was brought in for formal questioning. He maintained composure for the first 30 minutes. He reiterated the borrowed phone explanation. He denied ever entering Tower 3 that night. Then Rachel presented the interference anomaly. The fact that his device maintained uninterrupted signal during a localized jammer event. She did not accuse him of operating the jammer. She asked a simple question. Why was your phone immune? Quanal's silence extended. 17 seconds. Then he requested a lawyer. That shift did not end the day. Search warrants were executed on his vehicle and secondary storage unit registered under his name. Inside the storage unit, investigators located a compact signal jammer device. Portable. Operational. Battery charged. Serial number partially scratched, but traceable to an online industrial equipment supplier specializing in discrete surveillance tools. Purchase records linked to a prepaid card. The prepaid card had been activated at a kiosk 2 blocks from Northern Axis headquarters. Fingerprints on the jammer housing were smudged, but not entirely erased. One partial matched Kunal. By midnight, the case appeared straightforward. Corporate engineer silences security guard who discovered unauthorized storage misuse. Except one element resisted simplicity. The vault was empty. Whatever had been stored there was gone before Ramesh's death. Which raised the question. Was Ramesh killed to protect something still present? Or to erase knowledge of something already removed? Rachel returned once more to Tower 3 near 1 in the morning. Alone, she stood in the corridor and imagined the sequence. Ramesh arrives, receives call at 10:42, 9 seconds. Likely confirmation. He goes upstairs, meets someone he recognizes. Conversation near corridor. Then the strike. Single, efficient, body repositioned, cleanup attempt. Jammer activated during exit. Scaffolding descent. Motorcycle departure unseen during glitch window. But if Kunal was the operator, who rode the motorcycle? Traffic analysis showed a helmeted rider earlier at 10:11. Could that have been surveillance? Or was there a second participant? Rachel reviewed the taxi driver's statement again. He mentioned seeing a shadow moving higher up during his second pass before calling police. He assumed it was fabric shifting. He could not specify floor, but his timing placed that observation at 25 minutes past midnight, after the estimated time of death. If accurate, someone was still inside Tower 3 nearly an hour after the killing. The jammer would not need to operate then, which meant that second presence was not concerned with cameras. That second presence was doing something else. Rachel looked down at the corridor floor again. There were overlapping boot impressions. But beneath them, barely visible, was a faint secondary pattern. Different treed, lighter, smaller, overwritten but not erased. She requested enhancement imaging. Preliminary interpretation suggested at least 2 individuals had used that corridor within 24 hours. One heavier, one lighter. The case shifted again. Kunal Deshpande might have been present. He might have operated the jammer. He might even have moved the body. But he was unlikely to have acted alone, and someone else had returned to that corridor after the killing. Which meant whatever had been stored inside that vault had not yet completed its journey. Rachel closed the file for the night with one conclusion. This was not merely a murder. It was part of a controlled operation, and operations, when disrupted, unravel. She intended to pull. 2 sets of prints meant 2 timelines. By 6 in the morning, enhancement imaging from the corridor floor had isolated the secondary tread pattern more clearly. It was narrower, less deeply embedded in the cement dust, and angled slightly inward at the toe, suggesting a lighter individual with a different gait. Not Kunal Deshpande. Not Ramesh Iyer. Someone else. Rachel Monroe reviewed the overlay projections in silence while Roland documented the findings. The heavier tread, matching Kunal's industrial boots, overlapped the lighter pattern in multiple places. Sequence analysis indicated the lighter individual had entered the corridor first. The heavier set came later. That detail restructured the night entirely. If the lighter individual had accessed the vault before the killing, then Kunal's role might not have been primary. He could have been responding or covering. Rachel requested a time layer breakdown using dust displacement modeling. Based on disturbance depth and edge crispness, forensic analysts estimated the lighter prints were no more than 12 hours old at the time of discovery, which placed them within the same evening. Someone had accessed the vault shortly before Ramesh's arrival. Telecom triangulation was expanded to include all devices within a 300-meter radius during the 2-hour window surrounding the murder. Among the records, 3 anomalies emerged: one device with uninterrupted signal during the jammer window. Kunal's, one device that entered the radius at approximately 10:15 and powered off abruptly at 10:49. One device that registered movement vertically across tower grid mapping, ascending and descending within a short interval. The third device belonged to a prepaid SIM registered under falsified documentation. Its signal path was distinctive. It approached from the eastern service road, entered the compound perimeter, remained stationary for 22 minutes, then exited toward the riverfront bypass. The timestamp of exit aligned with the taxi driver's second pass. Rachel ordered camera sweeps along the bypass corridor. One municipal camera captured a motorcycle at 11:32 traveling at moderate speed. The rider wore dark clothing. No passenger. License plate unreadable. But the rear tire tread was partially visible when zoom enhanced. The pattern did not match Kunal's boots. It matched the lighter corridor impressions, which meant the lighter individual likely arrived and departed via motorcycle. Kunal's presence might have occurred earlier or later. Rachel examined Kunal's financial records again. There were no large deposits, no sudden transfers, no offshore activity. His profile resembled mid-level corporate management. Stable income, predictable expenses. If he were acting independently for profit, the trail would show movement. Instead, his connection appeared operational, not financial. Attention shifted back to Arvind Malhotra's death 6 months earlier. Official ruling: accidental fall from scaffolding at a redevelopment site owned by Northern Axis. Rachel reopened the autopsy file. Arvind's injuries included multiple fractures consistent with a fall, but there had also been a single penetrating wound on his left forearm, originally attributed to exposed rebar. The angle of that wound mirrored the precision seen in Ramesh's fatal strike. Clean, controlled, unnecessary for a simple fall. The medical examiner at the time had not pursued it further. Context had guided conclusion. Rachel requested re-examination of preserved tissue samples. If blade tool marks matched between the two cases, the connection would become forensic, not circumstantial. Meanwhile, interviews with Crescent Heights subcontractors revealed tension preceding construction halt. One name surfaced repeatedly: Dev Mehra, independent procurement consultant, not formally employed by Northern Axis, but frequently contracted for special acquisitions. Dev Mehra had no criminal record, but his prior business ventures included 2 dissolved shell companies and 1 civil lawsuit alleging contract fraud. His last documented contract with Northern Axis ended 3 weeks before Ramesh's death. Phone metadata showed that Dev's primary number had been active within the telecom radius near Crescent Heights at 10:18 that night. It powered off at 10:49. The timing aligned with the second anomaly device. Rachel requested Dev Mehra for questioning. He did not respond to initial contact. By mid-afternoon, officers discovered his registered apartment vacant. Neighbor statements indicated he had left with luggage early that morning. Travel database search flagged a one-way flight booking under his passport for departure the following day. Destination: Singapore. Rachel requested immediate airport notification. But she knew something. If Dev had accessed the vault before Ramesh's arrival, and if Kunal arrived afterward, their roles may not have aligned. One could have been extracting, the other containing. The vault brackets recovered from behind the corridor wall suggested a container approximately 1 meter long and 40 centimeters wide. Not large enough for bulk materials. Too small for fixtures, but suitable for documents, or data storage, or currency. A deeper audit into Northern Axis projects uncovered discrepancies in import manifests over the past year. Several high-value items listed as delivered never appeared in final installation records. Insurance claims had been filed citing theft during transit. Compensation collected, yet there were no police reports attached to those claims. Rachel mapped the timelines. Arvind files complaint regarding unauthorized vault retention. Arvind dies. Import discrepancies continue. Vault remains unused officially. Dev Mehra contracted intermittently. Ramesh drafts email referencing original plans. Dev accesses vault night of murder. Ramesh arrives. Kunal present with jammer. Single fatal strike. Vault empty next morning. If Dev removed whatever had been stored there before Ramesh discovered it, motive shifts. Ramesh may not have been protecting. He may have been about to expose, which would threaten multiple individuals. By evening, airport surveillance confirmed Dev Mehra had arrived at the departure terminal earlier than expected. He checked in under his own name. No visible panic. Rachel arrived at the airport with 2 officers at 8:47 in the evening. Dev was seated near gate 12, reading from his phone. He did not attempt to flee when approached. In interview, Dev acknowledged being near Crescent Heights that night. He claimed he had been meeting a private buyer interested in architectural salvage materials. He denied entering Tower 3. He denied knowledge of any vault. When confronted with telecom data placing his device inside the compound, he shifted explanation. He admitted to entering briefly but stated he left before any incident occurred. Ramesh was alive when I left, he said. What time? Rachel asked. 10:45. Time of death estimated 11:12. Dev claimed he had discovered documents stored illegally in the concealed vault. Documents implicating Northern Axis in fraudulent insurance claims tied to phantom imports. He stated he removed them to protect himself after learning internal disputes could expose contractors. He refused to specify the document's current location. When asked about Kunal, Dev hesitated, then admitted Kunal had contacted him earlier that evening warning him to leave the site alone. Rachel pressed further. Did Kunal know you were taking something? Less. Did he threaten you? No. Did anyone else meet you there? Dev paused, then shook his head. Rachel did not accept that denial. Motorcycle footage suggested a single rider, but sequence modeling showed 2 sets of corridor prints overlapping before the heavier ones. If Dev's lighter prints were first and Kunal's heavier prints second, who struck Ramesh? Dev insisted he left before 10:45. If true, the fatal encounter occurred later. Telecom logs showed Kunal's device remained active within radius until 11:23. Rachel introduced one final piece of evidence. Preliminary forensic comparison between Arvind's forearm wound and Ramesh's fatal wound suggested consistent blade width and entry profile. Dev's expression changed. Barely. But enough. You think this is connected? He said quietly. I think patterns repeat, Rachel replied. Dev leaned back. There was more than paperwork in that vault. What else? He looked toward the terminal window. Backup drives. Containing project financials, communications, insurance routing, names. Where are they now? Safe. Rachel held eye contact. If Ramesh knew about the vault, why didn't he remove anything? Dev answered without hesitation. He didn't know what was inside. He only knew it wasn't supposed to be there, which meant Ramesh had discovered irregular structure, but not contents, which meant motive to silence him would lie with those who knew the content. Kunal, or someone above him. Rachel requested immediate hold on Dev's departure. Search warrant executed on his luggage. Inside clothing, passport, laptop, no drives, no documents. Dev smiled faintly. You won't find them there. The case was no longer about a hidden vault alone. It was about evidence that could implicate an investment network. If Dev removed the drives before Ramesh arrived, and Kunal confronted Ramesh afterward, the confrontation may have escalated. But the precision of the fatal wound suggested skill, training, controlled force. Kunal was an engineer. Dev was a procurement consultant. Neither had documented weapons training. Ramesh, however, had military logistics background. If confronted unexpectedly, he would likely defend. Yet there were no defensive wounds, which returned Rachel to the beginning. The victim had not anticipated violence. He had trusted the person in front of him. Rachel requested background checks on both Dev and Kunal beyond professional records, military databases, private training affiliations, security certifications. One result surfaced late that night. Kunal Deshpande had completed a corporate-sponsored executive protection workshop 2 years earlier. Included in the curriculum edged weapon control and close quarters immobilization techniques. The training certificate bore instructor signature from a former special operations consultant. Rachel closed the file. The blade angle, the precision, the lack of struggle, the jammer coordination, the overlap prints. 2 men entered that tower. 1 removed evidence. 1 silenced a witness. And someone else, higher, benefited. The drives Dev claimed to have removed would either dismantle a corporate fraud network or disappear. Rachel intended to find them before either outcome finalized. The drives were not in Dev Mehra's luggage. They were not in his apartment. They were not in his vehicle, which meant one of 2 things. Either he had already transferred them to a third party, or he had concealed them somewhere he believed no one would look. Rachel Monroe did not believe in coincidence when timing aligned too precisely. Dev accessed the vault shortly before Ramesh arrived. Konal entered later. Ramesh died. Dev booked an international flight within hours. Flight risk suggested leverage. Leverage suggested possession. Rachel ordered a forensic sweep of Dev's laptop recovered at the airport. The device appeared clean. No external storage logs, no recent file transfers, no encryption software installed locally. Too clean. Metadata review revealed the laptop had been factory reset 3 days earlier, but a secondary anomaly surfaced in router logs from Dev's apartment complex. At 9:50, 3 in the evening, less than an hour before the murder, Dev's registered Wi-Fi network transmitted a short burst of encrypted outbound data to a cloud storage provider based overseas. Duration: 42 seconds. Data size approximately 300 megabytes. Enough for compressed document archives or multiple drive images. Rachel requested international assistance to preserve the remote account before deletion. Meanwhile, Dev maintained his position during extended questioning. He admitted removing material from the vault. He denied involvement in violence. He denied returning after leaving at 10:45. Rachel presented the motorcycle footage. He examined the still image carefully. "That's not my bike," he said evenly. Records confirmed Dev owned a sedan, but telecom mapping showed his device entering and exiting along the Eastern Service Road, the same path as the motorcycle. When confronted, Dev admitted he had used a hired courier to transport the extracted material. He refused to identify the courier, which meant a third participant existed. Rachel requested toll camera records along the bypass corridor. A partial plate from the motorcycle was enhanced through contrast analysis. Registration traced to a small delivery company operating informal logistics for corporate clients. The registered rider assigned that evening, Akash Verma, 27 years old, no criminal record, employed as independent contractor. Akash was located by noon the following day at his residence. He cooperated initially. He acknowledged being hired by Dev for a document pickup. He claimed he waited outside Crescent Heights while Dev retrieved a package. He insisted he never entered Tower 3. He departed at approximately 10:48, according to his statement. Telecom data partially supported this timeline, but corridor print sequencing suggested the lighter tread entered first and exited after the heavier one overlapped. If Akash never entered the building, his boots would not match corridor impressions. His shoes were seized. Pattern comparison ruled him out, which meant Dev himself likely entered the corridor, and the lighter prints belonged to him. That aligned with sequencing. Dev arrives first, removes drives, leaves around 10:45. Ramesh arrives shortly after. Konal enters. Confrontation occurs. Single precise strike. But one problem remained. The taxi driver reported movement in Tower 3 at 25 minutes past midnight, nearly an hour after the estimated time of death. Who was still inside? Rachel re-examined scaffolding access points. Dust displacement on outer planks indicated recent descent by a heavier individual consistent with Kunal's build. But on the 12th floor exterior ledge, near a partially installed glass frame, there were faint additional marks. Lighter, barefoot. Forensic luminol testing revealed diluted blood traces on that ledge. Small droplets, not matching the pooling pattern near the tarp, which suggested someone injured had stood there briefly. The blood type matched Ramesh, but there were no additional stab wounds, which meant the droplets likely transferred from contact. Rachel reconstructed the sequence. After the fatal strike near the corridor, Kunal moves the body onto tarp. Attempts rinse. prepares descent via scaffolding. But before leaving, something interrupts him. Perhaps noise. Perhaps realization that Dev had taken more than expected. Perhaps he searches the vault space again. The timeline window between 10:55 and 11:23 showed Kunal's device stationary within the tower. Then descending. If Dev left at 10:45 and Kunal arrived at approximately 11, overlap between them may have been minimal, unless someone else arrived between. Telecom anomaly number 3, the prepaid SAM moving vertically, returned to focus. Its movement signature did not align with Dev or Kunal's known devices. The prepaid SAM entered the compound at 10:52. Ascended, descended, exited at 11:32. The device remained powered on during jammer activity, which meant it was inside the effective shield radius. Rachel requested triangulation refinement. Based on signal bounce within the concrete structure, analysts estimated the device paused briefly on the 12th floor before moving upward to the 13th, an unfinished rooftop level. Why move upward, unless avoiding detection or observing? Drone footage from earlier site inspections was reviewed. On the rooftop level, temporary safety railings surrounded exposed slab edges. If someone stood there with visual line to the 12th floor ledge, they could monitor activity without entering the corridor. Rachel expanded background checks within Northern Axis Executive Circle. One name had minimal digital footprint yet frequent internal access privileges: Vikram Saran, Director of Risk Compliance, former private security contractor, no public controversy, no criminal charges. Telecom Cross, reference placed one secondary device, registered to a corporate pool account, under his department active within 2 kilometers that night. Its precise location could not be determined due to account routing. Rachel requested badge access logs for Northern Axis headquarters. Vikram had signed out at 9:30 that evening. He reported attending a private dinner across town. Restaurant CCTV showed him present until 10:15. But no footage captured him afterward. The prepaid SIM used falsified registration, but was purchased from a kiosk located 3 blocks from Northern Axis office. Receipt timestamp earlier that afternoon. Payment method: cash. Rachel requested fingerprint dusting at the kiosk counter. One partial matched Vikram Saran. Circumstantial, but converging. If Vikram suspected Dev might remove incriminating drives, he could have dispatched Kunal to intervene. If Dev extracted drives before Kunal arrived, tension escalates. Ramesh arrives unexpectedly. Vikram monitors from rooftop using prepaid device. Kunal confronts Ramesh. Single controlled strike. Dev already gone. But that still left the barefoot ledge marks. Forensic analysis of the diluted blood droplets on the exterior ledge indicated transfer from contact with Ramesh's clothing rather than a separate wound, which suggested the body had been moved near the ledge briefly before being repositioned on the tarp. Why bring the body to the edge? Rachel returned to the crime scene with scaled measurements. If the body were pushed from the 12th floor, the fall would result in catastrophic trauma consistent with accident. If Ramesh had been thrown after being stabbed, the death might be ruled fall-related, obscuring blade wound under impact damage. But the body had not been thrown. It had been staged inside, which meant the plan may have shifted mid-execution. Perhaps Kunal considered staging a fall, but presence of another observer, Vikram on rooftop, could complicate. Rachel ordered analysis of Ramesh's clothing fibers. Trace examination found microscopic glass fragments embedded in his shirt fabric, not from the 12th floor interior, from exterior railing installation points, which meant Ramesh's body had indeed been brought to the ledge. Held, then brought back. The decision not to stage a fall occurred after initial movement. What changed that decision? Time. If Dev left earlier than anticipated, and Vikram observed from rooftop, Kunal may have hesitated to risk a visible drop near a public road. Taxi driver's second pass occurred shortly after midnight. Headlights from the idling vehicle remained on. Witness exposure risk increased. Therefore, Kunal repositioned body inside instead. Rachel reviewed rooftop dust patterns. Near the southern corner, a partial footprint matched dress shoe tread, not boot. Vikram was known for formal attire even off-duty. If he stood on the rooftop while Kunal handled the body below, command hierarchy was clear. Kunal operational, Vikram supervisory, Dev opportunistic. Ramesh unintended obstacle. By evening, warrant obtained for Vikram Saran's residence. Search uncovered a locked briefcase containing burner phones. One matched IMEI to the prepaid CM used that night. Call logs showed one outgoing call at 10:42, 9 seconds, to Ramesh Iyer's phone. The incoming call logged on Ramesh's device, which meant Vikram lured Ramesh upstairs. Rachel reconstructed final moments. Ramesh receives brief call. Instruction to check 12th floor regarding structural irregularity. He trusts caller. Corporate representative. He ascends. Finds Kunal inside corridor. Conversation begins. Possibly questioning missing vault contents. Vikram observing from rooftop. Decision made. Blade drawn. Single strike. Body moved toward ledge for potential staging. Abandoned due to risk. Repositioned inside on tarp. Jammer activated during exit. Dev already departed with drives. 3 actors. Different motives. 1 fatal convergence. Rachel requested arrest warrants for both Kunal Deshpande and Vikram Saran. Dev Mehra remained material witness, complicit in theft but not homicide. The drives still missing. Cloud account preservation confirmed encrypted archive uploaded before murder. Decryption key unknown. Dev claimed key stored offline. Rachel believed him. For now. The case was no longer about whether Ramesh had discovered something. He had, and it had triggered a containment response from individuals trained not merely in finance, but in control. But containment had failed. Because Dev had already extracted the evidence. And because one mistake, barefoot dust on an exterior ledge, had rewritten the narrative from accident to execution. Concrete remembers, but so does sequence. And sequence now pointed upward. Arrest warrants were executed at 6:30 in the morning. Kunal Deshpande was taken into custody in his residence without resistance. Vikram Saran was apprehended leaving an underground parking facility beneath Northern Axis headquarters. Neither spoke during transport, but silence can fracture under sequence pressure. Rachel Monroe chose to question them separately, staggered by timing. Kunal first. He maintained composure during processing. His legal counsel arrived within an hour. He invoked representation immediately. Rachel did not begin with accusation. She began with reconstruction. You arrived at Crescent Heights shortly after 10:50, she said evenly. Dev Mehra had already removed material from the concealed vault. Ramesh Iyer was called to the 12th floor at 10:42. You confronted him near the corridor. He questioned the unauthorized space. You had instructions to contain exposure. Kunal's gaze remained forward. She continued. You were trained in edged weapon control 2 years ago. The wound was precise. Single insertion. No defensive marks. That suggests trust or hesitation. A pause. Did he recognize you? She asked. Kunal's jaw shifted slightly. Rachel placed forensic overlays on the table, boot tread alignment, cement dust match, jammer serial linkage. Then she placed a photograph of the exterior ledge. You considered staging a fall. No reaction. But someone was watching from above. That statement registered. A flicker. Rachel leaned forward. You were not alone in that building. Connell's attorney intervened. No further statements. Rachel ended the session. Vikram Saran was more controlled. He requested water before speaking. Rachel began with the prepaid SAM purchase. Fingerprint partial. Burner phone in his briefcase. Outgoing 9-second call to Ramesh. Vikram did not deny the call. I requested a status update, he said. At 10:42 at night. Rachel asked. There had been reports of trespassing. Rachel did not dispute. She shifted instead to rooftop dust impressions. Why were you at Crescent Heights that evening? I was not. She slid enhanced rooftop footprint imagery across the table. Dress shoe trade. Pattern matching a pair recovered from Vikram's residence. He studied it, then looked back. That proves nothing. Rachel nodded slightly. You're correct. It proves presence, not action. She paused. What did Dev take from the vault? Vikram's eyes hardened. There was no vault. Rachel did not respond immediately. Instead, she described the reinforced chamber dimensions. Mounting brackets. Residual adhesive. She described Arvind Malhotra's complaint. His death. Insurance discrepancies. She described the drives Dev claimed to have removed. And if those drives surface, she said quietly, they will outline routing structures tied directly to Northern Axis executive approvals. Vikram's composure thinned. That would depend on what was actually stored, he said. Rachel shifted angle. Did you instruct Kunal to intercept Dev? Silence. Did you authorize use of a signal jammer? Silence. Did you authorize lethal force? That question lingered. Vikram's response came measured. No one authorized lethal force. Important phrasing. Not denial of presence. Not denial of coordination. Only denial of authorization, which suggested the outcome had escalated beyond initial plan. Rachel reassembled the likely operational sequence. Vikram learns Dev intends to access concealed vault. He deploys Kunal to intercept or retrieve contents. Dev arrives earlier than expected, removes drives, leaves. Vikram calls Ramesh to ensure site access and plausible explanation for movement inside Tower 3. Ramesh ascends unaware of confrontation context. Kunal confronts Ramesh about vault knowledge. Ramesh resists silence or threatens report. Blade used. Vikram observes escalation from rooftop vantage. Decision made not to stage fall due to external traffic exposure. Cleanup initiated. Jammer activated. Exit executed. But something remained inconsistent. If Vikram had been on rooftop observing, why leave barefoot dust impressions near southern corner? Dress shoe tread matched. But adjacent to that print was a partial scuff inconsistent with formal footwear. Rachel requested reanalysis. The scuff contained fine grit not present elsewhere on rooftop. Lab comparison indicated it matched soil composition from Northern Axis headquarters rooftop garden, which meant Vikram had likely visited headquarters rooftop earlier that day. Residue transfer to shoes. Presence at Crescent Heights that night. Pattern alignment strengthened. Meanwhile, digital forensics on Dev's overseas cloud archive confirmed encrypted container intact. Court order secured to compel cooperation. Dev was brought back in. Confronted with murder charge implications if obstruction continued. He hesitated longer this time, then provided decryption key. Inside the archive were scanned contracts, internal emails, insurance claim routing spreadsheets, and photographs of the concealed vault with serial numbers visible on external hard drives mounted inside. The emails were more damaging. They outlined coordinated inflation of import values, staged transit losses, and reimbursement claims processed through subsidiary shell companies. Approval chains included Vikram Saran's digital signature on multiple compliance memos. One message stood out. Subject: Secure Interim Storage, T3. A T3. Tower 3. Instruction: retain vault infrastructure until audit cycle complete, which contradicted official decommissioning record. Another message from Kunal to Vikram, dated 3 days before murder. Security guard flagged irregular floor plan variance. Recommend site inspection. Vikram's reply: handle discreetly. No documentation. Rachel closed the file. That line carried weight. Handle discreetly. No documentation. In operational language, that could mean correction or containment. Kunal was re-interviewed after disclosure of email evidence. This time without lawyer present, after counsel agreed to limited cooperation discussion. Rachel placed printed email chain before him. He stared at his own message, then at Vikram's response. You were instructed to handle discreetly, she said. I was told to assess risk. He replied. And you brought a blade. He did not answer. She shifted approach. Ramesh was not part of the fraud. He discovered structural inconsistency. He might have filed report. Connell's voice lowered. He was going to. How do you know? He said he would. That was the first admission. What happened next? Connell inhaled slowly. I did not intend. He stopped. Rachel waited. He grabbed my arm. For what purpose? He reached for his phone. To report. Yes. And you reacted. Silence, but the silence was different, less resistant, more weighted. You were trained, she said. I overreacted. The phrasing was narrow, not denial, not justification. Overreaction implies acknowledgement of act. Rachel pressed. Did Vikram instruct you to use force? Nubu. Did he instruct you to prevent report? Yes. Clear. Concise. Rachel documented. Was he on rooftop? Kunal closed his eyes briefly. Less. Did he see the strike? Yes. That altered hierarchy. Supervisory presence during lethal escalation. Why not stage fall? Rachel asked. There was traffic. Kunal said. Headlights visible. He said too risky. which meant decision to abandon staged accident came from Vikram. Operational authority. Rachel concluded session. Charges formalized. Kunal Deshpande second-degree murder, obstruction, unlawful interference of telecommunications. Vikram Saran conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice, accessory to murder, evidence suppression. Dev Mahrai corporate fraud, theft of proprietary material, obstruction pending cooperation agreement. But before public disclosure, one more verification remained. Arvind Malhotra's re-examined tissue sample returned comparative toolmark consistency, with blade recovered from Kunal's vehicle during secondary search. The blade had been concealed within tool kit compartment. Microscopic striation patterns matched both Arvind's forearm wound and Ramesh's fatal wound, which meant Arvind's accidental fall had not been accidental. The forearm wound likely preceded fall, perhaps incapacitation, then push. Pattern repetition. Handled discreetly. No documentation. Rachel stood once more at Tower 3 late that evening, 12th floor, wind moving through unfinished frames. She replayed sequence in order. Arvind questions vault retention. Silenced. Dev discovers fraud trail. Extracts drives. Ramesh identifies structural irregularity. Silenced. Kunal executes containment under Vikram's supervision. The fraud network believed physical elimination would preserve financial architecture, but they miscalculated two constants: digital redundancy and sequence reconstruction. Concrete remembers. Dust preserves order. Emails archive intention. And small deviations. Barefoot scuffs, soil residue, 9-second calls, accumulate. The tower remained unfinished, but the structure of the case was complete. 3 men entered that building with separate objectives. One left believing control was maintained. Another left believing leverage secured. The third did not leave. Now, the pattern extended beyond Tower 3. Insurance claims tied to Northern Axis were being audited. Investors questioned. Arrest announcements pending. The vault that once concealed drives now stood empty. But its absence carried more weight than its contents ever did. Because absence forced investigation, and investigation forced exposure. The wind moved again through open concrete. It did not beg. It carried. And this time, it carried consequence. The arrests made headlines before noon. Corporate compliance director detained. Senior engineer charged. Fraud investigation expanding. But headlines simplify. Rachel Monroe did not. By mid-morning, Northern Axis issued a controlled public statement distancing executive leadership from isolated misconduct. Legal teams moved quickly to frame the case as rogue employee action. That narrative required one thing above all: limiting Vikram Saran's exposure beyond direct supervision, which meant pressure would begin immediately. Rachel anticipated it. By 2 in the afternoon, requests for access to the investigation file arrived through legal channels. Motions were filed seeking to suppress digital evidence recovered from Dev Mira's cloud archive, arguing unlawful international retrieval. Court authorization documentation was airtight, but delay tactics were predictable. Meanwhile, forensic accounting teams began tracing insurance claim flows tied to the drive's spreadsheets. The financial structure was layered through shell entities across 3 jurisdictions. Funds were routed, reimbursed, and reclassified under development loss offsets. On paper, it resembled aggressive but legal financial optimization. In metadata, it revealed coordination. Email timestamps showed deliberate sequencing between project valuation adjustments and vault retention instructions. Arvind Malhotra's complaint now carried amplified relevance. Rachel reviewed Arvind's final week before death. Phone records showed 2 missed calls from Vikram, 1 answered call lasting 4 minutes. Then silence. The day Arvind fell from scaffolding, site CCTV cameras had experienced a brief outage. 4 minutes. Identical duration to the Crescent Heights glitch. Same jammer model identified through purchase records linked to Vikram's department. Pattern repetition was no longer speculative. It was structural. Rachel requested reopening of Arvind's case formally as homicide. This decision carried weight beyond paperwork. It acknowledged a second victim silenced under similar operational methods. While prosecutors prepared formal charges, Rachel focused on the one unresolved variable: intent hierarchy. Kunal admitted overreaction. Vikram denied authorizing lethal force, but acknowledged instructing discretion. Dev extracted evidence for leverage, but none of them acted without confidence that broader corporate leadership would not intervene. Confidence implies precedent, which meant someone above Vikram may have known vault retention existed. Rachel subpoenaed internal board communications during the period when Tower 3 redesign occurred. Board minutes referenced temporary asset shielding due to audit timing irregularities. Language sanitized, but intent visible. One board member stood out in correspondence frequency: Chairman Raghav Bedi. His name appeared in forwarding chains regarding insurance exposure thresholds. He did not sign compliance memos directly, but he responded to vault retention. Subject threads with single-line replies. Proceed until audit cycle closes. Audit cycle closed 3 months after Arvind's death. Vault remained active beyond that date, which suggested audit justification may have been pretext. Rachel requested an interview with Beatty. Corporate counsel declined voluntary appearance. Formal subpoena process initiated. In custody, Vikram adjusted strategy. He requested meeting with prosecutors. Limited cooperation offered in exchange for sentence mitigation. During that session, recorded and documented, Vikram reframed events. He admitted knowledge of fraudulent insurance inflation. He admitted Vault used to store off ledger documentation and backup drives. He admitted instructing Kunal to intercept Dev and prevent document removal. He denied foreseeing confrontation with Ramesh. When pressed about rooftop presence, he acknowledged being there. Observation only, he said. Why observe personally? Prosecutor asked. Because Dev was unpredictable. And Ramesh. Collateral complication. That phrase was noted. Collateral complication. Rachel reviewed that portion repeatedly. It revealed mindset. Ramesh was not seen as individual risk. He was a variable. Variables are removed in operational frameworks. Rachel returned to the timeline again, focusing on the moment between confrontation and strike. Kunal stated Ramesh reached for phone. Ramesh's phone was found in his pocket. Call log showed no outgoing attempt during that period, which meant he may not have successfully initiated call. But forensic swipe data on the screen revealed fingerprint smears consistent with recent unlock attempt at 10:58. Sequence. Call from Vikram at 10:42. Ramesh ascends. Conversation with Kunal. Realization of irregularity. Attempt to call someone, possibly police. Blade strike occurs before connection. That suggested reactive violence, but reactive under instruction to prevent documentation, which linked authorization indirectly. Meanwhile, Dev's cooperation extended. He provided names of 2 additional projects where vault-style spaces existed unofficially. Search warrants executed. In one, behind sealed drywall, investigators found empty mounting brackets identical to Tower 3. In another, a vault contained 3 encrypted drives and currency bundles. Financial mapping expanded. The fraud network was larger than initial projection. Yet Rachel's focus remained on the homicide. Because fraud carries sentences. Murder carries gravity. Forensic lab delivered final confirmation late that evening. Trace fibers on Ramesh's jacket cuff matched fabric lining from Vikram's overcoat recovered during search. Contact occurred, which meant Vikram descended from rooftop at some point before or after the strike. He was not merely observing. He had physical proximity to the body. Rachel confronted him again. You touched him, she said. Vikram remained composed. I checked for pulse. When? After. After the strike. Yes. Why? To assess damage. To assess survivability. Rachel clarified. Yes. And? He was gone. Did you consider calling emergency services? Silence. That would create record. Vikram said finally. Record. Documentation. Paper trail. The same concept Arvind threatened. The same risk Ramesh represented. Pattern consistency now complete. Rachel documented supplementary charge of failure to render aid. Though symbolic, it reinforced intent hierarchy. Meanwhile, news outlets began uncovering financial irregularities independently. Whistleblower rumors circulated. Investors distanced publicly. Board emergency session scheduled. Rachel received notice that Chairman Beatty agreed to appear voluntarily after legal negotiation. During interview, Beatty denied operational knowledge of vault specifics. He characterized board language as temporary asset management flexibility. When presented with email chain including his directive, Proceed until audit cycle closes. He claimed it referred to construction scheduling. Rachel asked direct question. Did you know Vault remained active after audit closure? No. Did you know Arvind Malhotra died after filing complaint regarding structural deviation? I was informed of accident. Did you request independent review? No. Did you question why security contractor was killed near same structural deviation 6 months later? BD paused. Corporate instinct calculated risk. No. Rachel ended session. Board liability would be pursued through financial channels. Criminal conspiracy beyond Vikram required additional proof of direct intent. But homicide charges remained anchored. That night, Rachel returned one final time to Crescent Heights, not to revisit evidence, but to test silence. The 12th floor remained unfinished, wind passing through open frames. Dust settled again where boot prints once overlapped. She stood near the corridor entrance. Imagined Arvind months earlier noticing deviation. Imagined Ramesh recognizing inconsistency. Imagined Kunal weighing instruction against escalation. Imagined Vikram calculating exposure against visibility. In both deaths, the same calculus applied. Preserve structure. Eliminate variable. But structures built on concealment fracture under scrutiny. Concrete remembers. Digital archives persist, and individuals underestimated sequence reconstruction. By midnight, prosecutors finalized dual homicide filings. Arvind Malhotra and Ramesh Iyer. Fraud indictments expanding. Northern Axis shares plummeting. Audit committees activated across partner firms. Dev Mehra entered formal cooperation agreement in exchange for reduced charges. His leverage had become testimony. Kunal's confession recorded. Vikram's admissions partial but sufficient. The case no longer hinged on interpretation. It hinged on consequence. Rachel left Tower 3 without looking back. The scream never entered initial report. But it no longer needed to, because the silence that followed had been decoded. And sequence, once decoded, does not reverse. Indictments changed the temperature of the case. Once homicide charges were formally filed in connection with both Ramesh Iyer and Arvind Malhotra, the investigation shifted from exposure to containment of fallout. Northern Axis entered crisis mode. Emergency board resolutions were passed overnight suspending Vikram Saran. Pending outcome. Public messaging emphasized cooperation with authorities. Legal teams attempted to isolate the criminal narrative to individual misconduct. But the digital archive Dev Mehra had extracted did not support isolation. It demonstrated continuity. Rachel Monroe spent the morning with financial crime analysts reconstructing riding chains across insurance reimbursements. The pattern repeated across 3 redevelopment sites beyond Crescent Heights. Inflated import valuations. Declared transit losses. Insurance claims processed. Funds reallocated internally. Vault-style interim storage retained off record. The fraud element was now systemic, but Rachel's focus narrowed to a more immediate variable. Risk. When corporate fraud intersects with homicide exposure, risk extends beyond courtroom consequences. Witness vulnerability increases. Dev Mehra had provided decryption keys and sworn testimony implicating both Kugal and Vikram in operational containment efforts. He was now a liability to anyone seeking damage control. Rachel requested protective measures. Dev was relocated under temporary security oversight. Kunal remained in custody. Vikram's legal team filed aggressive pretrial motions questioning evidentiary integrity. Meanwhile, reopening of Arvind's case triggered renewed media scrutiny into his original accident. His family had accepted the earlier ruling reluctantly. Now, with homicide confirmation pending, civil action discussions began. Rachel revisited Arvind's site where the fall occurred. The scaffolding configuration 6 months earlier had been partially preserved in photographs. She studied fall trajectory models alongside wound angle data. The forearm puncture wound, matching blade striation recovered from Kunal's tool kit, preceded fall, meaning Arvind had likely been incapacitated before being pushed. The scaffolding edge where he fell showed no defensive scuff marks in archived images, which meant no struggle at the edge. Single strike, loss of stability, fall. The method mirrored Ramesh's encounter in precision, though staging differed, that indicated repetition under similar instruction. Rachel compiled parallel timeline overlays. Arvind files complaint regarding unauthorized vault retention. Within 72 hours, he dies. Ramesh drafts unsent email referencing sealed corridor. Within 14 days, he dies. Both death preceded audit cycles, closing on projects tied to inflated insurance claims. The pattern was not emotional. It was procedural. During afternoon proceedings, prosecutors informed Rachel that Vikram had amended his cooperation posture. He now sought full plea negotiation, conditioned on limiting testimony regarding board-level knowledge, which meant leverage still existed. Rachel attended the session. Vikram's revised statement included admission that he had informed Chairman Raghav Bedi about vault retention risk exposure after Arvind's complaint. He stated Bedi responded, "Ensure no written escalation. Manage internally." The wording avoided explicit violence, but it reinforced concealment intent. Rachel asked directly, "Did Chairman Bedi know you carried a jammer?" "No." "Did he know you brought Kunal to intercept Dev?" "He knew intervention was required." "Define intervention." "Prevent removal of sensitive material." "By any means." Vikram hesitated. He did not specify. Ambiguity preserved at upper tier, but ambiguity combined with pattern can imply tolerance. Prosecutors considered expanding conspiracy charges upward, though threshold for criminal liability at board level required clearer directive. Meanwhile, Dev disclosed something new during follow-up debrief. He admitted that when he accessed the vault, he saw not only drives and documentation, but a ledger notebook. Physical. Handwritten. He left it behind. Rachel paused. "Why?" "It wasn't part of the digital archive, and I didn't have time. That notebook, if still in vault or relocated, could contain manual tracking entries predating digital documentation." Search teams re-entered Tower 3 with focused objective. Behind secondary drywall panel adjacent to original vault chamber, they located a narrow recess. Inside, wrapped in plastic sheeting, was a black, bound ledger. Dust indicated it had not been moved since the night of the murder, which meant neither Dev nor Kunal retrieved it. The ledger contained entries spanning 14 months. Amounts recorded in coded shorthand, cross-referenced initials, project abbreviations, and notations reading T3 secure and A resolved, next to a date aligning with Arvind's death. A resolved. Rachel documented the phrase carefully. It was not financial notation. It was operational shorthand. Resolved. The ledger elevated conspiracy context. It implied acknowledgement of problem elimination. Forensic handwriting analysis linked the script to Vikram. Comparison with compliance memos confirmed match probability high. Rachel confronted Vikram again. He examined photocopies without visible surprise. "You kept records," she said, "for reconciliation." He replied. "And a resolved." He did not answer. "That corresponds to Arvind's death." Silence. "And no entry for Ramesh." There wasn't time. The response came too quickly, which meant the ledger had not been updated post-Ramesh, perhaps because sequence accelerated beyond control. Meanwhile, Chairman Bedi's legal team requested second voluntary interview. Tone shifted. He now acknowledged awareness that vault retention posed regulatory sensitivity. He denied knowledge of lethal containment, but he conceded instructing Vikram to prevent external audit escalation at all costs. That phrase, "at all costs," entered transcript. Though vague, it expanded interpretive boundary. Prosecutors weighed whether it satisfied conspiracy threshold. Rachel remained cautious. Intent in white-collar command structures rarely appears explicit. It diffuses downward. Language softens. Responsibility fragments. But when repeated deaths follow directive phrasing, fragmentation narrows. By evening, forensic accounting finalized loss estimate tied to fraudulent claims. Total exceeded 12 million. Insurance carriers initiated independent civil action. Shareholders filed class suits. Northern Axis suspended operations at 2 additional sites pending audit. The case now existed on 3 fronts: dual homicide prosecution, corporate fraud indictment, civil financial collapse. Yet Rachel's attention returned to a quieter detail. During search of Vikram's office, investigators found a photograph pinned inside a locked drawer. It depicted Tower 3 under early construction, taken before vault drywall seal. The photo was dated 1 week before Arvind's complaint. On the back, in Vikram's handwriting, temporary. Temporary structures often become permanent when oversight fades. Temporary decisions become fatal when concealment escalates. Rachel visited Ramesh's family that night. She informed them charges had been upgraded to include conspiracy. She described evidence in measured terms. They asked one question: why him? Rachel answered truthfully: because he noticed something that wasn't supposed to exist. That answer carried weight beyond grief. It explained both deaths. Arvin noticed. Ramesh noticed. Noticing disrupted concealment. Concealment triggered intervention. Intervention escalated. The tower remained unfinished. The vault dismantled. The ledger seized. The drives decrypted. The pattern mapped. But one element still required anticipation: trial strategy. Defense would argue overreaction, lack of direct board instruction, absence of explicit murder order. They would attempt to sever fraud from homicide. Rachel began preparing chronological narrative anchored not in speculation but in repetition. 4-minute jammer during Arvin's death. 4-minute jammer during Ramesh's death. Vault retention before both. Complaint proceeding first. Draft email proceeding second. Instruction to handle discreetly. Instruction to prevent documentation. Physical blade matching both wounds. Rooftop oversight. Ledge staging attempt. Failure to render aid. Ledger notation A resolved. Sequence, when presented intact, resists fragmentation. Rachel compiled the case file into a single timeline document. No dramatic phrasing. No editorial language. Just order. Because order dismantles obfuscation. As night settled, she stood once more at Crescent Heights. This time not on 12th floor, but at ground level, looking upward. The structure cast a hollow silhouette against city light. Wind moved through incomplete frames. It carried no scream, but it carried echo. 2 men silenced for noticing structural deviation. 1 engineer who crossed into lethal containment. 1 compliance director who supervised. 1 board chairman who instructed prevention without documentation. 3 tiers. 1 vault. 2 deaths. The next chapter would not unfold in concrete. It would unfold in court. And sequence would speak there as well. Courtrooms are designed to fragment. Defense separates action from intent. Prosecution separates coincidence from pattern. Jurors are asked to isolate moments rather than follow continuity. Rachel Monroe understood that if this case fractured into isolated incidents, a stabbing in an unfinished tower, a fall from scaffolding months earlier, irregular insurance filings, the connective tissue would weaken. So the prosecution strategy did not begin with violence. It began with structure. Opening arguments mapped Tower 3 before mentioning Ramesh Iyer. Blueprint revisions were displayed. The concealed corridor, the reinforced vault space that was removed on paper but retained in concrete. Audit cycles were explained. Insurance valuation inflation demonstrated. Email language projected in sequence proceed until audit cycle closes. Handled discreetly. No documentation. Ensure no written escalation. Manage internally. Only then did the timeline narrow to the night of the murder. 10:40, 29, second call from Vikram Saran to Ramesh. 10:50, 8 attempted phone unlock by Ramesh. 11:12 estimated time of death. 4-minute jammer interference. The jury did not see drama. They saw order. Kunal Deshpande's partial admission was played in controlled segments. His phrasing, "I overreacted," was replayed carefully. The prosecution emphasized the blade recovery from his vehicle and forensic striation match to both Ramesh's fatal wound and Arvin's forearm puncture. The defense argued training did not equal intent. They suggested Ramesh may have lunged. They implied accidental escalation. But sequence again resisted simplification. The medical examiner testified that the blade entered at upward angle between ribs with controlled depth and trajectory inconsistent with chaotic motion. There were no hesitation marks. No secondary thrusts. Single, decisive insertion. Then repositioning of the body. Then attempted rinse. Then rooftop observation. When Vikram took the stand under negotiated testimony agreement, he attempted measured distance. He admitted presence. He admitted rooftop observation. He admitted instructing Kunal to prevent documentation. He denied authorizing lethal force. The prosecutor asked one question that altered tone. When you descended from the rooftop and checked Ramesh Iyer for pulse, why did you not call emergency services? Vikram paused. Because the situation required containment. The word echoed. Containment. The prosecution did not challenge it immediately. They let it rest. Later, when the ledger was introduced, the handwritten notation, "A resolved," was displayed alongside the date of Arvind Malhotra's death. Forensic handwriting experts confirmed authorship probability high. The prosecutor asked, "What did resolved mean?" Vikram responded carefully. It referred to internal audit concern. Did Arvind Malhotra's complaint disappear after his death? Yes. Did you reopen it? No. The courtroom remained still. The prosecution then displayed the second pattern. No ledger entry existed for Ramesh. The implication was clear. Resolution had been interrupted by exposure. Dev Mehra testified under cooperation agreement. He described the vault contents, the drives, the photographs, the ledger left behind. He admitted his own criminal involvement in extracting material for leverage. The defense attempted to undermine credibility, highlighting his self-preservation motive. Rachel anticipated that angle. The prosecution introduced corroborating digital timestamps and independent forensic validation of the archive contents, separating Dev's motive from the archive's authenticity. When Arvind Malhotra's family took the stand to describe the day of his death, the courtroom atmosphere shifted from technical to human. But even then, the prosecution maintained structure. They avoided emotional appeal beyond necessity. They returned to repetition. 4-minute jammer during Arvind's death. 4-minute jammer during Ramesh's death. Blade striation match. Vault retention. Instruction to avoid documentation. The defense attempted one final fracture. They argued that fraud does not equate to murder. That financial wrongdoing created paranoia, but not premeditated homicide. That Kunal's overreaction was individual failure under stress, not systemic design. In closing, the prosecutor responded not with accusation, but with alignment. He projected a side-by-side timeline of both deaths, complaint filed, internal instruction to manage discreetly, jammer outage, physical incapacitation fatal fall, draft email referencing structural irregularity, instruction to prevent documentation, jammer outage, single blade strike, abandoned staging attempt. Patterns, he said, are not coincidence when they repeat under identical command language. Rachel watched the jury as they examined the overlays. They were not reacting emotionally. They were processing order. Deliberations lasted 3 days. On the fourth morning, verdicts were read. Kunal Deshpande guilty of second-degree murder in the death of Ramesh Iyer. Guilty of manslaughter elevated to murder in the death of Arvind Malhotra. Guilty of unlawful signal interference and obstruction. Vikram Saran guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud. Guilty of accessory to murder in both deaths. Guilty of obstruction and failure to render aid. Chairman Raghav Bedi was not convicted of homicide. Evidence threshold for direct lethal authorization did not meet criminal standard. However, he was indicted separately on fraud and regulatory violation counts pending civil litigation. The courtroom exhaled in layers. Sentencing would follow. Rachel did not attend the post-verdict press conference. She returned instead to Crescent Heights. Construction had resumed under court, appointed oversight. Tower 3's 12th floor now had temporary lighting installed. The concealed corridor was gone, demolished fully during evidence recovery. The vault chamber had been filled with reinforced concrete. Permanent removal. She stood where the tarp once lay. Where the body had been aligned deliberately. The wind still moved through the structure, but the sound was different. Less hollow, more obstructed. Ramesh's family would receive restitution from civil settlements. Arvind's family would reopen wrongful death claims. Northern Axis would dissolve under regulatory sanction, but consequence in court does not reverse sequence. It only acknowledges it. Rachel considered the moment when Vikram checked for pulse. He had known. He had chosen silence over emergency. Chosen containment over life. That was not panic. It was priority. The case demonstrated something precise. Fraud requires concealment. Concealment requires control. Control, when threatened, can escalate. The tower was nearly complete now. Glass panels installed. Concrete sealed. The vault erased. But removal does not eliminate history. It seals it. Concrete remembers. Digital archives persist. And small deviations. Emails, boot prints, soil residue, 9-second calls. Form lines that cannot be erased once drawn. Rachel left the site as workers prepared to pour finishing layers on the 12th floor. The scream that never entered the first report had now entered record permanently. Not as sound, as sequence, and sequence once recognized becomes precedent. Precedent warns, precedent deters, precedent remains. Sentencing hearings are quieter than trials. There are no timelines projected on screens. No competing narratives fighting for structure. Only consequence measured in years. Conal Deshpande stood first. He spoke briefly, not to dispute the verdict, not to deflect responsibility. He described the moment on the 12th floor as a decision that lasted less than a second and will last the rest of my life. He did not say Ramesh's name until the final sentence. The court imposed life imprisonment with eligibility for review after a statutory minimum term. Consecutive sentencing was applied for the second homicide tied to Arvind Malhotra. The blade, once catalogued as evidence, became an exhibit of repetition. Vikram Saran's sentencing followed. His counsel emphasized absence of explicit lethal instruction, his cooperation in financial fraud exposure, his lack of direct physical participation in the fatal strike. The prosecution emphasized rooftop oversight, 9-second call, instruction to prevent documentation, failure to render aid, and ledger notation. A resolved. Accessory to murder carries gravity without wielding the weapon. The sentence reflected that distinction. Long-term incarceration, substantial financial penalties, prohibition from corporate governance roles indefinitely. He did not address the families directly. He spoke instead about institutional pressure and complex environments. Rachel noted the language carefully. Deflection through abstraction. Raghav Bedi faced separate proceedings. Fraud indictments advanced. Regulatory violations substantiated. Shareholder litigation compounded. Criminal conspiracy to murder was not secured at trial. But civil discovery unearthed board communications revealing tolerance of vault retention despite audit closure. He resigned. Northern Axis entered structured dissolution under regulatory supervision. Insurance carriers pursued recovery through asset seizure. The case extended beyond prison terms. It reshaped compliance frameworks across redevelopment sectors, mandated third-party audits, prohibited off-ledger storage, restricted executive communication channels during audit cycles. Structural consequences emerged. Weeks later, Rachel received confirmation that Crescent Heights would be renamed before completion. Developers sought distance from the case. Names change easily. Foundations do not. She visited Arvind Malhotra's family again after sentencing. They asked whether justice felt complete. Rachel answered carefully. Justice is formal acknowledgement. Completion is different. Ramesh Iyer's former patrol route was reassigned permanently. The temporary gate at Crescent Heights replaced with automated surveillance monitored by independent oversight. Small corrections, visible ones, months passed. Trial transcripts archived. Financial recovery proceedings ongoing. Media attention shifted to newer events. But one detail remained unsettled in Rachel's mind. During forensic audit of Northern Axis communications, analysts identified one deleted thread predating Arvind's complaint by nearly 3 months. Recover fragments referenced, pilot retention site, T3, and proof of concept. Proof of concept implied experimentation, meaning Tower 3 vault may have been the first structured concealment of its kind. If so, then Arvind's discovery disrupted not merely fraud but expansion. Rachel cross-referenced earlier Northern Axis projects completed prior to Tower 3. No documented vault anomalies. No unexplained deaths, which suggested escalation began with success. Once fraud operated undetected through one audit cycle, confidence increased. Vault retention normalized. Containment language hardened. Risk tolerance expanded, until deviation occurred. Arvind noticed. Ramesh noticed. Notice triggered reaction. Reaction triggered escalation. Escalation triggered collapse. Rachel prepared a post-case report for departmental review. She structured it not around individual culpability, but systemic vulnerability. Key findings included language ambiguity at executive level, enabling downward operational interpretation. Physical concealment infrastructure correlating with digital financial irregularities. Use of telecommunications interference devices during critical exposure windows. Pattern repetition in staged accident methodology. Importance of environmental residue analysis. Dust layering, soil transfer, ledge fiber traces. In reconstructing concealed intent, the report would circulate quietly among investigative units. Precedent, again. One evening near the anniversary of Ramesh's death, Rachel returned once more to the completed building. Tower 3 was no longer skeletal. Balconies enclosed, lighting warm, residents occupying upper floors. The 12th floor duplex units now furnished. She stood in the lobby this time, not on concrete. A plaque near the elevator listed building specifications. No reference to prior events. No visible mark of vault existence. History integrated beneath surface. She considered how easily physical evidence can be erased when concrete is poured over memory. But erasure fails when sequence has been documented. Arvind Malhotra's case file, now officially recorded as homicide. Ramesh Iyer's as murder connected to corporate conspiracy. The ledger archived. The drives preserved as trial exhibits. The jammer cataloged. The blade sealed. The silence decoded. As she exited the building, wind moved between towers again. Not hollow now, filtered through glass and finished walls. The scream that never entered the first report had transformed into precedent across financial compliance training seminars and law enforcement briefings. Rachel understood something constant. Fraud rarely begins with violence. It begins with justification. Temporary adjustments. Flexible interpretations. Manage internally. No documentation. And when those phrases are tolerated without challenge, they accumulate weight. Weight eventually demands protection. Protection can escalate. Escalation can kill. This case did not begin with a blade. It began with a blueprint revision that remained unverified. A concealed corridor left intact. A vault labeled temporary. Rachel paused near the curb before leaving. City noise carried normally. Traffic steady. Life uninterrupted. But beneath one finished floor, buried behind reinforced concrete, remained the space where a vault once stood. Empty now. Permanent. Concrete remembers. And in this case, so did the record. The file closed officially that week, not because questions ended, but because sequence had been answered. And answered sequence does not fade. It informs the next deviation before it escalates. That is the only form of completion cases like this allow. Cases close on paper long before they close in pattern recognition. 6 months after sentencing, a compliance symposium hosted by the National Redevelopment Council circulated anonymized excerpts from the Northern Axis investigation. The language was stripped of names. The vault was referred to as unauthorized structural retention. The homicides were categorized as escalation events. Escalation events. Rachel Monroe read the summary twice. Terminology sanitizes consequence. But beneath sanitized language, structural adjustments began spreading across the industry. Mandatory structural variance audits were now required at each phase transition in large-scale projects. Concealed architectural revisions demanded third-party verification. Telecommunications interference devices were added to restricted procurement watch lists. Insurance carriers amended payout procedures to include physical inventory cross-check before disbursement. Precedent had moved outward. Yet one final element surfaced quietly through routine review. An independent forensic accountant assigned to assist in civil recovery discovered a micro-transfer pattern embedded within older Northern Axis ledgers. Transactions routed through a dormant subsidiary months before Tower 3 construction began. The amounts were smaller, frequent, structured. They did not align with insurance reimbursements. They aligned with political contribution channels, indirectly. Rachel requested deeper tracing authority. The subsidiary had funded consultancy retainers for a regional zoning advisory committee during the same period Tower 3's redesign passed through expedited approval. No overt illegality appeared on surface, but timing aligned. Vault retention required blueprint revision acceptance without site inspection escalation. If zoning oversight had been influenced subtly, concealment infrastructure may have been easier to implement. The pattern suggested systemic facilitation, not isolated corporate deviation. Rachel met with Financial Crimes Division to determine threshold for expanding inquiry. Evidence was circumstantial but layered. Transactions preceded vault implementation. Regulatory oversight had been minimal during redesign approval. Arvind's complaint later referenced discrepancy between filed and executed floor plan. meaning structural deviation may have bypassed full municipal review. A quiet inquiry began. No press release, no public statement, just document requests. 2 zoning officials retired shortly after inquiry notices were served. One accepted consulting work abroad. The other declined interview through counsel. The inquiry did not immediately produce criminal charges, but it widened the perimeter of awareness. The case of Tower 3 no longer represented only corporate fraud and dual homicide. It represented a vulnerability pathway, from blueprint to vault to silence. Rachel updated her internal report addendum. Structural concealment rarely occurs without regulatory blind space. A blind space can be intentional or purchased. Meanwhile, Dev Mehra completed testimony obligations. He received reduced sentencing under supervised release tied to ongoing cooperation. His attempt at leverage had triggered collapse he could not control. He relocated out of state under monitored terms. Connell began serving his sentence. Vikram's appeals process initiated but stalled under weight of documented sequence. Raghav Bedi's civil liability settlement concluded with forfeiture of substantial assets. The Crescent Heights building, now renamed Meridian Rise, achieved occupancy above 70%. Residents unaware of the concealed corridor that once existed behind their walls. One evening, Rachel received a message routed through departmental channels. It contained no name, only a sentence. There is another vault. Attached was a scanned fragment of architectural markup referencing a different development site across the city, one not affiliated with Northern Axis. The markup showed a shaded area labeled Temporary Mechanical Buffer, dimensions similar to Tower 3's concealed chamber. No official documentation referenced such a space. Anonymous tip. Possibility of imitation. Precedent spreads both deterrence and replication. Rachel requested site plans for the referenced development. She compared early drafts to filed final approvals. The shaded area disappeared in final filing. But the construction photographs from initial foundation phase showed a deeper, then required recess in the same structural location. It could be innocuous. It could be nothing. Or it could be proof that vault retention had not been isolated to one company. Fraud models propagate when successful. Containment methods propagate when unchallenged. Rachel did not wait for complaint. She requested immediate structural variance inspection under new audit guidelines inspired by Tower 3 findings. Access granted under compliance sweep authority. The site was active. Concrete poured. But in the sublevel mechanical area, beneath temporary partitioning, investigators located an unregistered chamber cavity. Empty. No drives. No ledger. No jammer. But recent enough in construction timeline to suggest intent. The project developer denied knowledge. Architectural firm cited subcontractor error. Subcontractor cited miscommunication. Language familiar. Temporary. Manage internally. No documentation. Rachel stood in that unfinished cavity. Different building. Company. Same dimensions. Same possibility. The cavity had not yet been used, but existence alone mattered. Because structural concealment precedes concealment of conduct, she issued formal notice to halt construction pending review. Developers protested. Cited delays. Financial impact. Rachel remained neutral. Structural verification was now standard. What once required death to expose now triggered immediate scrutiny. Weeks later, investigation revealed the cavity resulted from misaligned subcontractor execution rather than deliberate vault retention. Blueprint overlays confirmed no coordinated concealment infrastructure beyond error. The project resumed. False alarm. But necessary alarm. Precedent functions not by assuming guilt, but by verifying structure before escalation. Rachel filed closure note on the anonymous tip. Even false echoes serve purpose when pattern awareness exists. That evening, she returned briefly to Meridian Rise. Not entering, just observing the skyline. Tower 3 no longer skeletal. No tarp. No corridor. No vault. But beneath the finished surface lay documentation that would never disappear. 2 men silenced because they noticed deviation. 1 engineer who escalated. 1 compliance director who supervised. 1 chairman who prioritized avoidance of record. And an industry that adjusted only after exposure. The scream that never entered the first report had become regulatory reform. Sequence had become policy. Concrete had been poured again in another building, but this time under scrutiny. Rachel turned away from the skyline. The case of Tower 3 would be cited in training modules for years, not for its violence alone, but for its structure. Fraud creates concealment. Concealment creates vulnerability. Vulnerability, when threatened, tempts escalation. But once a pattern is mapped and documented, escalation becomes harder to hide. The file was archived permanently, not buried, indexed. Accessible, because memory, whether in concrete, dust, or record, remains the only defense against repetition, and repetition had been interrupted. If this case stayed with you, subscribe for more investigations where every detail counts. And in the comments, tell me, what was the moment you knew something didn't add up?